Most people don't wake up afraid. They wake up unarmed. And whatever you don't equip yourself with in the morning will be used against you by noon. Fear doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly through uncertainty, pressure, bad news, and unanswered questions. But here's the truth most believers miss. Fear cannot survive where revelation lives. Psalm 27 is not a poem, it's a strategy. David wasn't hoping God would show up. He was reminding himself who God already is. When you start your morning with this psalm, you're not just reading scripture, you're resetting your identity. You're declaring that light is greater than darkness, confidence is greater than confusion, and faith is stronger than fear. If fear has been talking to you lately, this message will silence it. Because when faith speaks first, fear never gets the microphone. Fear is not an emotion problem, it's an information problem. Most people think fear shows up because they are weak, or because life is hard, or because something went wrong. That's not true. Fear shows up when the mind lacks accurate, authoritative information. Wherever there is a vacuum of truth, fear rushes in to fill the space. Fear feeds on uncertainty, and uncertainty always comes from not knowing or forgetting what God has already said. That's why two people can face the same situation and respond completely differently. One is calm, confident, grounded. The other is anxious, overwhelmed, and restless. The difference is not the circumstance. The difference is the information they are operating from. One is responding to facts alone, the other is responding to truth. Facts may describe what is happening, but truth determines what is possible. This is where Psalm 27 becomes powerful. David didn't start by talking about his enemies. He didn't start by describing the danger. He started by establishing the correct information. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? That's not emotional language. That's a logical language. He is saying, if God is my source of illumination and God is my deliverer, then fear no longer has a rational foundation. Fear collapses when truth is introduced. Most fear survives because it goes unchallenged. It sits in the mind unchecked, unquestioned, unexamined. But the moment you confront fear with revelation, fear has to justify itself, and it can't. Fear sounds loud, but it's not intelligent. Fear has volume, not evidence. Truth, on the other hand, doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be present. When David says, "The Lord is the strength of my life, of whom shall I be afraid?" he is reframing reality. He's not denying danger, he's redefining dominance. He's saying strength doesn't come from my ability, my resources, or my preparation. Strength comes from alignment with God. And once strength is settled, fear becomes unnecessary. Here's the mistake many people make. They try to eliminate fear by managing emotions. They try to calm themselves down, distract themselves, or motivate themselves. But fear is not impressed by motivation. Fear only responds to information that outranks it. That's why temporary encouragement wears off, but revelation produces lasting confidence. When truth enters the system, fear gets evicted. This is why morning matters. Whatever information you consume first sets the tone for your thinking. If you wake up and immediately feed your mind uncertainty, bad news, pressure, and noise, fear will feel justified. But if you start your day by feeding your mind truth, fear loses its credibility before the day even begins. Psalm 27 works because it installs correct information at the beginning of the day. It reminds you who God is before the world tries to tell you who you are. It reminds you where your help comes from before problems start making demands. It upgrades your perspective before fear has a chance to downgrade your confidence. Fear doesn't disappear because the situation changes. Fear disappears because your understanding changes. When your understanding changes, your emotional response has no choice but to follow. That's why repetition matters. You don't repeat truth because God forgot it. You repeat truth because fear is persistent, and revelation must be more persistent than fear. Every time you declare truth, you are reinforcing a mental framework. Over time, that framework becomes your default. And when truth becomes your default, fear has no place to land. It might knock, but it won't move in. This is what it means to eliminate fear. You don't fight it, you outgrow it, you replace inferior information with superior revelation. And when light is present, darkness doesn't need to be removed, it leaves automatically. Start your morning with truth, and fear won't survive the day. What you listen to in the morning determines what you believe all day. That's not a motivational statement, that's a law. The mind is most open at the beginning of the day, and whatever you deposit into it first sets the trajectory for everything that follows. Morning input doesn't just inform your thoughts, it frames your reality. That's why two people can wake up in the same house, face the same schedule, and experience completely different days. One is empowered, the other is exhausted before noon. The difference is not time, talent, or opportunity. The difference is input. Every morning your mind wakes up empty, but not neutral. It's ready to be filled, and it will be filled by something. If you don't choose the input, the world will choose it for you. News, notifications, opinions, pressure, and noise are all competing for the first word of your day. And whatever speaks first usually speaks loudest. The first voice becomes the reference point, and every decision you make afterward is filtered through that voice. This is why faith is not just spiritual, it's strategic. Faith is built through intentional exposure. Belief doesn't happen by accident. Belief is formed by repetition of information that carries authority. When you start your day without truth, fear doesn't have to work hard. Fear feels logical when there's no higher perspective present to challenge it. Think about it this way. Your mind is like a bank account. Every thought you deposit either earns interest or charges a fee. Fear-based input creates mental debt. It costs you peace, focus, and confidence. Faith-based input creates mental income. It pays you back in clarity, stability, and courage. Morning input decides whether you're operating in profit or loss for the rest of the day. This is why Psalm 27 belongs in the morning. Not because it's poetic, but because it's preventative. It installs truth before fear shows up with its arguments. When you declare, "The Lord is my light and my salvation," early in the day, you're not reacting to problems. You're preloading your mind with perspective. And when perspective is preloaded, panic can't override it. Most people wait until fear shows up before they try to address it. By then, fear has already built momentum. It has already influenced decisions, conversations, and reactions. But when you start the day with truth, fear never gets a head start. It enters an environment where it's already outnumbered. Morning input also determines emotional stamina. The reason many people feel drained so early is not because the day is demanding, but because their thinking is unprotected. They wake up, open their phone, and absorb stress without realizing it. By the time they face real responsibilities, they're already depleted. But when you begin the day with truth, you're not borrowing energy from willpower. You're drawing strength from alignment. Consistency is where this becomes powerful. One morning of truth is helpful. Many mornings of truth are transformative. Over time, what you consistently listen to becomes what you instinctively believe. You don't have to talk yourself into faith when faith has already been rehearsed. You don't have to resist fear when fear no longer feels reasonable. This is why repetition matters more than intensity. A calm daily exposure to truth will outperform occasional emotional moments every time. Psalm 27, spoken regularly, reshapes your internal dialogue. Eventually, the words you read in the morning become the thoughts you think under pressure. And when pressure comes, you don't rise to the occasion, you default to your training. The morning is not just the start of your day, it's the foundation of your mindset. Build it intentionally, and everything above it becomes more stable. Ignore it, and no amount of effort later will fully compensate. Choose your morning input wisely, because whatever you listen to first will decide what you believe last. Faith doesn't grow by wishing, and it doesn't grow by waiting. Faith grows by rehearsing the word until confidence becomes automatic. Most people misunderstand faith. They think faith is a feeling you fall into or a moment you experience when everything lines up. But faith is not accidental. Faith is trained. Faith is built the same way strength is built, through consistent, intentional repetition. What you rehearse regularly becomes what you respond with naturally. That's why pressure doesn't create who you are, it reveals who you've been practicing. When life applies pressure, you don't suddenly decide what to believe. You default to what you've already rehearsed. If fear has been rehearsed, fear shows up. If truth has been rehearsed, confidence shows up. Not because you're trying harder, but because it's already been installed. This is why reading scripture once in a while doesn't produce unshakable faith. Information that is visited occasionally does not shape behavior. Information that is rehearsed consistently becomes identity. When David spoke Psalm 27, he wasn't experimenting with words. He was reinforcing convictions. He wasn't hoping they would work. He was reminding himself of what he already knew to be true. Rehearsal is powerful because the mind believes what it hears most often. Not what is correct, not what is logical, but what is familiar. Familiarity creates comfort, and comfort creates confidence. That's why fear repeats itself. Fear knows if it can keep talking, it can start sounding believable. The solution is not to silence fear once. The solution is to outspeak it consistently. When you rehearse the word, you're not trying to convince God of anything. You're training your own thinking. You're aligning your inner dialogue with a higher authority. Over time, your mind stops debating truth and starts trusting it. And when trust is established, faith no longer requires effort. It becomes instinct. This is where most people miss it. They want faith to show up on demand, but they haven't practiced it in advance. They want courage in crisis, but they've only rehearsed truth in comfort. You don't train during the battle, you train before the battle so that when the battle comes, your response is already decided. Psalm 27 is a rehearsal script. Every declaration in it strengthens a specific part of your thinking. The Lord is my light trains your perception. The Lord is my salvation trains your expectation. The Lord is the strength of my life trains your confidence. Each repetition strengthens the muscle of belief until doubt no longer feels natural. This is why automatic confidence is the goal. Not emotional hype, not temporary inspiration. Automatic confidence means when something unexpected happens, fear doesn't even get the first response. Faith answers before panic forms a sentence. That only happens when truth has been rehearsed so often that it becomes the default language of your mind. Think about anything you do well. You don't think about it anymore. You don't struggle with it. You don't negotiate with yourself. You just do it. That's the level faith is supposed to operate on. Effortless, grounded, settled. And that level is reached through repetition, not intensity. Many people wait to feel faith before they speak truth, but rehearsal works in the opposite direction. You speak truth first, and faith follows. Confidence is not the cause of repetition. Repetition is the cause of confidence. The more you rehearse truth, the less room fear has to argue. This is why consistency matters more than emotion. You don't need to feel powerful to rehearse truth. You just need to be committed. Over time, what felt like discipline becomes delight, and what felt forced becomes familiar. When the word has been rehearsed long enough, fear doesn't need to be confronted. It simply doesn't fit anymore. Rehearse the truth daily, and confidence will eventually show up uninvited. When David said, "The Lord is my light," he wasn't describing a feeling, he was declaring a source. Light determines how you see. Whatever you accept as your light becomes your reference point for reality. If circumstances are your light, then whatever changes around you will change what you believe. If people's opinions are your light, then approval and rejection will control your confidence. But when God becomes your light, clarity no longer depends on conditions. You don't see life through fear. You see fear through truth. Most people are not afraid because they are weak. They are afraid because they are referencing the wrong source. Fear is often the result of misalignment, not danger. When you look at life through limited information, uncertainty feels overwhelming. But when you shift the source of your understanding, the same situation loses its power to intimidate you. David didn't deny the presence of enemies. He simply refused to let them define the situation. He understood something many people miss. Circumstances are data, not direction. They provide information, but they do not provide meaning. Meaning comes from your source. When God is your reference point, circumstances become secondary. They are no longer the authority. They are just the environment. This is why fear dies when God becomes the reference point. Fear needs authority to survive. It needs permission to speak, and it gets that permission when circumstances are treated as final. But the moment you elevate God above the situation, fear loses its position. It may still exist, but it no longer leads. It becomes background noise instead of the main voice. When David said, "The Lord is my salvation," he was declaring outcome in advance. Salvation means deliverance, rescue, preservation. He wasn't waiting to see how things turned out before deciding what to believe. He decided first, then faced the situation from that decision. That's not denial, that's leadership. Faith leads circumstances instead of reacting to them. Too many people allow life to set the agenda for their thinking. They wait for clarity to feel confident, for improvement to feel hopeful, for results to feel secure. But when God is your reference point, confidence comes before clarity, hope comes before improvement, and peace comes before results. You don't wait for evidence to believe. You believe so that evidence doesn't control you. This shift changes everything. When God is your source, you stop asking, "What if it goes wrong?" and start asking, "What does God say about this?" That single question realigns your thinking. It pulls you out of emotional reaction and places you into intentional response. Fear thrives on unanswered questions. Faith thrives on remembered truth. David also said, "The Lord is the strength of my life." Strength is capacity. It's the ability to stand, to endure, to move forward. By declaring God as his strength, David was removing pressure from himself. He wasn't relying on personal resolve or human stamina. He was anchored to a strength that does not fluctuate with energy, mood, or circumstances. This is why fear weakens people so quickly. Fear forces you to rely on yourself. It makes you believe that everything depends on your ability to figure it out, fix it, or control it. That's exhausting. But when God becomes your reference point, responsibility shifts. You still act, but you're not carrying the weight alone. Strength comes from alignment, not effort. When God is your reference point, fear doesn't disappear because problems vanish. Fear disappears because problems lose authority. They are no longer the judge of your future. They are no longer the narrator of your story. God is. This is not passive thinking. It's disciplined focus. It's choosing again and again to measure life by truth instead of pressure. And every time you do that, fear weakens and faith strengthens. Make God your reference point, and fear will no longer know where it belongs. Repetition is the mother of belief. Not emotion, not intensity, not a single powerful moment. What you hear once may inspire you, but what you hear repeatedly eventually instructs you. The human mind is shaped more by frequency than by force. That's why advertisements work, why habits form, and why fear can feel so convincing. Fear repeats itself. It tells the same story over and over until it sounds like truth. The only way to counter repetition is with repetition that carries higher authority. Belief is not something you decide in a moment. It's something that settles over time. Whatever you expose your mind to consistently becomes familiar, and whatever becomes familiar becomes believable. This is why casual exposure to truth produces casual faith, but consistent exposure produces courage. Consistency compounds. Small doses of truth applied daily reshape the way you think, respond, and interpret life. Psalm 27 is designed for repetition. It's not a verse you read once and move on from. It's a declaration you return to until it rewires your inner dialogue. Every time you repeat it, you are reinforcing a pattern of thinking that pushes fear further to the margins. Fear cannot dominate a mind that is repeatedly reminded of who God is. Most people underestimate the power of daily practice. They think transformation requires dramatic change, but it usually requires disciplined simplicity. Saying the same truth again today feels ordinary. Saying it again tomorrow feels unnecessary. But saying it consistently over time changes who you are. Repetition doesn't feel powerful in the moment, but it becomes powerful in the long run. This is why fear feels so automatic for many people. Fear has been rehearsed for years. It has been repeated through experiences, conversations, media, and memories. It's familiar, and familiarity gives it influence. You don't have to believe fear intentionally. It has already been practiced. That's why truth must be practiced with equal or greater consistency if it's going to take root. Repetition doesn't make truth true. Truth is already true. Repetition makes truth dominant. It moves truth from the surface of your awareness into the foundation of your thinking. When that happens, fear no longer feels natural. It starts to feel out of place, like a foreign language you no longer speak fluently. This is how courage compounds. One repetition doesn't eliminate fear. 10 repetitions start to weaken it. 100 repetitions reframe your default response. Over time, you stop trying to believe. You just believe. Not because you're forcing it, but because belief has become familiar. The danger is inconsistency. Inconsistency keeps resetting the process. When truth is consumed occasionally and fear is consumed daily, fear wins by default. But when truth is practiced daily and fear is challenged consistently, fear loses momentum. It doesn't vanish instantly, but it loses influence steadily. This is also why emotional moments alone don't sustain faith. Emotion fades, but repetition remains. You don't need to feel inspired to repeat truth. You just need to be committed. Over time, commitment produces confidence, and confidence produces calm. Every repetition is a vote for truth. A vote for clarity, a vote for faith. And while one vote doesn't decide the outcome, many votes do. Eventually, belief wins the election in your mind. Don't underestimate what daily declarations are doing beneath the surface. Even when it feels like nothing is changing, something is being built. Faith is accumulating. Courage is compounding. Fear is slowly losing its grip. Repeat truth long enough, and fear will stop feeling familiar. You don't eliminate fear by fighting it. You eliminate fear by outgrowing it through revelation. Most people waste energy trying to wrestle fear to the ground. They argue with it, resist it, suppress it, and feel guilty when it shows up anyway. But fear is not impressed by effort. Fear is only displaced by growth. You don't defeat fear head on. You rise above the level where fear can operate. Fear thrives in low awareness. It feeds on partial understanding and incomplete perspective. That's why fear feels strongest when information is limited and vision is narrow. But revelation expands the frame. Revelation doesn't just answer questions, it changes the way questions are asked. And when your perspective changes, fear loses its environment. Think about it. There are things that once terrified you that don't bother you at all now. Not because they disappeared, but because you grew. You didn't fight them. You outgrew them. Maturity made fear irrelevant. The same thing happens spiritually. As revelation increases, fear becomes unnecessary. This is why Psalm 27 is so effective. It doesn't instruct David to confront fear. It elevates his understanding. It lifts his focus above the threat and anchors it in truth. When David says, "Whom shall I fear?" he's not pretending fear doesn't exist. He's realizing that fear no longer fits the size of his revelation. Fear shrinks when revelation expands. You don't have to chase fear out. It leaves when it can no longer justify its presence. Darkness doesn't argue with light. It retreats. And fear doesn't argue with truth. It dissolves. Many people try to manage fear at the same level it was created. That never works. You cannot solve a problem from the same level of thinking that produced it. Fear is born in limited perspective, so it must be addressed from elevated understanding. That's what revelation does. It upgrades the operating system of your mind. Revelation gives context. It reminds you that what you see is not all there is, and what you feel is not all that's true. Fear speaks in absolutes. It says always, never, what if, and it's over. Revelation speaks in authority. It says God is, God has, and God will. And authority always outranks speculation. This is why fear fades as faith matures. Faith is not blind optimism, it's informed confidence. It's the result of seeing more clearly. As revelation accumulates, fear loses its leverage. It can no longer manipulate you with half-truths when full truth is present. Outgrowing fear also changes how you respond to pressure. Instead of reacting emotionally, you respond intentionally. Instead of panicking, you pause. Instead of assuming the worst, you remember what you know. Revelation slows you down in the best way. It replaces urgency with clarity. This doesn't mean fear will never knock. It means fear won't move in. Fear may visit, but it won't have authority. It won't decide your actions or define your future. When revelation is strong, fear becomes informational at best, not influential. This is the ultimate goal. Not a life where fear never appears, but a life where fear no longer leads. Where truth has grown so large that fear feels small. Where confidence is not forced but natural. Every time you choose revelation over reaction, you grow. Every time you return to truth instead of rehearsing fear, you mature. And as you mature, fear quietly loses relevance. Grow in revelation, and fear won't survive the upgrade.